everyone, let's continue with the ninth NCRT history and chapter 4th, that is the forest society and colonization. In section 2 we will shift our focus to the study of livelihood and economies. We will look at how the lives of forest dwellers and pastoralists changed in the modern world and how they played a part in shaping these changes. All too often, in looking at the emergence of the modern world, we only focus on factories and cities, on the industrial and agricultural sectors that supply the market. But we forget that there are other economies outside these sectors, other people too who matter to the nation. To modernize the lives of the pastoral and the forest dwellers, the shifting cultivators and the food gatherers often seem to be stuck in the past. It is as if their lives are not important. When we study the emergence of the contemporary world, the chapters in the chapter 2 will suggest that we need to know about their lives, see how they organize the world and operate the economies. These communities are very much part of the modern world we live in today, and they are not simply survivors from a bygone era. Chapter 4 will take you into the forest and tell you about the variety of the ways the forests were used by the communities living within them. It will show how in the 19th century the growth of the industries and the urban centers, ships and the railways created a new demand on the forest for timber and other forest produce. Now demands led to the new rules of the forest use, new ways of organizing the forest, and you will see how the colonial control was established over the forest, how the forest area were mapped, the trees were classified, the plantations were developed. All these developments affected the lives of those local communities who used the forest resources. They were forced to operate within the new systems and reorganize their lives, but they also rebelled against the rules and persuaded the state to change its policies. The chapter will give you an idea of the history of such developments in the India and Indonesia. The livelihoods, economies and societies. ठीक है. For chapter 5th will track the movement of the pastoralists in the mountain and the deserts, in the plains and plateaus of India and Africa. The pastoral communities in both these areas form an important segment of population. Yet we rarely study their lives. Their histories do not enter the page of textbooks. Chapter 5th will show you how their lives were affected by the controls established over the forest, the expansion of agriculture, and the declining of the grazing fields. It will tell you about the patterns of the movement, their relationship to other communities, and the way they adjust to the changing situations. We cannot understand the making of the contemporary world unless we begin to see the changes in the lives of diverse communities and people. We also cannot understand the problems of modernization unless we look at its impact on the environment. टेक अ क्विक लुक. तो हम लोग पहले स्टार्ट करते हैं फॉरेस्ट सोसाइटी एंड कॉलोनाइजेशन. ठीक है. Take a quick look around your school and home and identify all the things that come from forest. The paper and the books you're reading, the desk and the tables, the doors and the windows, the dyes that color your clothes, the spices in your food, the cellophane paper of your toffee, tendu leaves and beaties, gum, honey, coffee, tea and rubber. Do not miss out the oil in the chocolates that comes from sal seeds, the tannin used to convert the skins and hides into leather, or the herbs and the roots used for medicinal purposes. Forests also provide bamboo, the wood for the fuel, the grass, charcoal, packaging, fruit, flowers, animals, birds, and many other things. In the Amazon forest or in the Western Ghats, it is possible to find as many as 500 different plant species in one forest patch. A lot of this diversity is fast disappearing. Between 1700 and 1925, the period of industrialization, 13.9 million square kilometers of the forest, or 9.3% of the world's total area, was cleared for industrial use, cultivation, pastures, and fuel wood. The Forest Society and Colonialism. Uh, Asal Forest in Chhattisgarh. The disappearance अब अब देखो यार डिफॉरेस्टेशन क्या है. द डिसअपियरेंस ऑफ द फॉरेस्ट इज रेफर्ड टू एज डिफॉरेस्टेशन. डिफॉरेस्टेशन इज नॉट अ recent problem. The process began many centuries ago, but under colonial rule it became more systematic and extensive. Let us look at some of the causes of deforestation in India. Land to be improved. In 1600, approximately one-sixth of the India's landmass was under cultivation. Now that figure has gone up to about half. As the population increased over the centuries and the demand for the food went up, the peasants extended the boundaries of cultivation, clearing forest and breaking new land. In the colonial period, the cultivation expanded rapidly for a variety of reasons. First, the British directly encouraged. Why deforestation? When the valleys were full, it's a painting by John Dawson. Native Americans like the Lakota tribe who lived in the great North American plains had a diversified economy. They cultivated maize, forest for the white plants, and hunted bison. Keeping the vast areas open for the bison to range in was seen by the English settlers as wasteful. After the 1860s, the bisons were killed in large numbers. फिर एक सोर्स है द आइडिया दैट कल्टिवेटेड लैंड हैज़ टू बी टेकन ओवर एंड इम्प्रूव्ड वाज पॉपुलर विद द colonizers anywhere everywhere in the world. It was an argument that justified conquest. In 1896, American writer Richard Harding wrote on the Honduras in Central America. There is no more interesting question of the present day than that of what is to be done with the world's land which is lying unimproved. Whether it shall go to the great power that is willing to turn it to account or remain with its original owner who fails to understand its value. The Central Americans are like a gang of the semi-barbarians in a beautifully furnished houses of which they can understand neither its possibilities of comfort nor its use. 3 years later, the American-owned United Fruit Company was founded. United Fruit Company was founded and grew bananas on an industrial scale in Central America. The company acquired such power over the governments of these countries that they came to be known as banana republics. The production of the commercial crops like the jute, sugar, wheat, and cotton. The demand for these crops increased in 19th century Europe, where the food grains were needed to feed the growing urban population and the raw materials were required for industrial production. Second, in the early 19th century, the colonial state thought that the forests were unproductive. They were considered to be wilderness that had to be brought under cultivation so that the land could yield agriculture products and revenue and enhance the income of the state. So between 1880 and 1920, the cultivated area rose by 6.7 million hectares. We always see the expansion of cultivation as a sign of progress, but we should not forget that for land to be brought under the plough, forests have to be cleared. The sleepers on the tracks. Box 1. The absence of cultivation in a place does not mean the land was uninhabited. In Australia, when the white settlers landed, they claimed that the continent was empty or terra nullius. In fact, they were guided through the landscape by the Aboriginal tracks and led by Aboriginal guides. The different Aboriginal communities in Australia had clearly demarcated territories. The Nagar Indejiri people of Australia plotted their land along the symbolic body of the first ancestor, the Nagurunderi. This land included 5 different environments: salt water, riverine tract, lakes, bush, and desert plain, which satisfied different socio-economic needs. Converting the sal logs into the sleepers in the Singbom forest, Chota Nagpur. May 1897. The Adivasis were hired by the forest department to cut the trees and make the smooth planks which would serve as sleepers for the railways. At the same time, they were not allowed to cut these trees to build their own houses. Sleepers are wooden planks laid across the railway tracks. They hold the tracks in position. Fair. By the early 19th century, the oak forests in the England were disappearing. This created a problem of timber supply for the Royal Navy. How could English ships be built without a regular supply of strong and durable timber? How could imperial power be protected and maintained without ships? By the 1820s, the search parties were sent to explore the forest resource of India. Within a decade, the trees were being felled on a massive scale and vast quantities of timber were being exported from India. The spread of railways from the 1850s created a new demand. Railways were essential for colonial trade and for the movement of imperial troops. To run the locomotives, the wood was needed as fuel, and to lay the railway lines, sleepers were essential to hold the tracks together. Each mile of the railway track required between 1760 and 2000 sleepers. From the 1860s, the railway network expanded rapidly, and by 1819, about 25,500 kilometers of track had been laid. In 1946, the length of the tracks had increased to over 7,65,000 kilometers, and as the railway's tracks spread through India, a larger and larger number of trees were felled. As early as the 1850s and the Madras Presidency alone, 35,000 trees were being cut annually for the sleepers. The government gave out contracts to individuals to supply the required quantities. These contractors began cutting the trees indiscriminately. Forests around the railway tracks fast started disappearing. The elephants piling the squares of the timber at a timber yard in Rangoon. In the colonial period, elephants were frequently used to lift heavy timber both in the forest and at the timber yards. Bamboo rafts being floated down the Kastelong River, Chittagong Hills Tract. The new line to be constructed was the Indus Valley Railway between the Multan and Sukkar. A distance of nearly 300 miles. At the rate of 2,000 sleepers per mile, this would require 600,000 sleepers, 10 feet by 10 inches by 5 inches, being upward of 2 lakh cubic feet. The locomotives would use the wood fuel at the rate of one train daily either way, and at the 1 mont per train mile, an annual supply of 2,19,000 monts would be demanded. In addition, a large supply of the fuel for the brick burning would be required. The sleepers would have to come mainly from the Sindh forest, the fuel from the Tamarisk and the Jhand forest of the Sindh and the Punjab. The other new line was a northern state railway from the Lahore to Multan. It was estimated that 2 crore 2 lakhs 22 lakh sleepers would be required for its construction. It is from the forest of India. फिर each mile of the railway track required between 1760 and 2000 sleepers. If one average sized tree yields 3 to 5 sleepers for a 3-meter wide broad gauge track, calculate approximately how many trees would have to be cut to lay 1 mile of track. Okay, so when the forest department decided to take up an area for logging, one of the first thing it did was to build a wide road so that the tracks could enter. Compare this to the forest tracks along which people walk to collect the fuel wood and other minus forest produce. Many such trucks of the wood go from forest areas to big cities. Women returning from the home after collecting fuel wood. ठीक है, तो ऐसे रंग में भी आ रही हूँ. ठीक है, ऐसे ही रखे रंग. Plantations. Large areas of the natural forest were also cleared to make the way for the tea, coffee, and rubber plantations to meet the Europe growing need for these commodities. The colonial government took over the forest and gave the vast area to the European planters at the cheap rates. These areas were enclosed and cleared of the forest and planted with the tea or coffee. In the previous section, we have seen that the British needed forest in order to build the ships and railways. The British were worried that the use of the forest by the local people and the reckless felling of the trees by the traders would destroy the forest. So they decided to invite a German expert, the Dietrich Brandes, for advice and made him the first Inspector General of the Forest in India. Dietrich Brandes, the first Inspector General of Forest in India, IG. The Brandes realized that a proper system had to be introduced to manage the forest and people had to be trained in the science of conservation. This system would need legal sanction. Rules about the use of the forest resources had to be framed. The felling of the trees and grazing had to be restricted so that the forest could be preserved for the timber production. Anybody who cut the trees without following the system had to be uh, punished. So Brandes set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and helped formulate the Indian Forest Act of 1865. The Imperialist Forest Research Institute was set up at Dehradun in 1906 and the system they taught here was called the scientific forestry. Many people now, including the ecologists, feel that this system is not scientific at all. ठीक है, अब एक और चीज़ बताओ कि अब यहाँ राइज था ऑफ कमर्शियल फॉरेस्ट्री. ठीक है. One essay of a managed popular forest in Tuscany, Italy. People for popular forests are good mainly for the timber. They are not used for leaves, fruit, or other products. Look at the straight lines of the trees, all of a uniform height. This is the model that scientific forestry has promoted. ठीक है. फिर साइंटिफिक फॉरेस्ट्री होता क्या है? अ सिस्टम ऑफ कटिंग ट्रीज कंट्रोल्ड बाय द फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट इन विच द ओल्ड ट्रीज आर कट एंड द न्यू वंस प्लांटेड. ठीक है. अब in the scientific forestry, the natural forest, which had lots of different type of trees, were cut down. In their place, one type of tree was planted in the straight rows. This is called a plantation. The forest officials surveyed the forest, estimated the area under the different type of trees, and they made working plans for the forest management. They planned how much of the plantation area to cut every year. The area cut was then to be replanted, so it was ready to be cut again in some years. After the Forest Act was enacted in 1865, it was amended twice, once in 1878 and then in 1927. The 1878 Act divided the forest into three categories: the reserved, protected, and the village forest. The best forests were called the reserve forests. The villagers could not take anything from these forests even for their own use, for house building or the fuel. They could take wood from the protected or village forest. How were the lives of the people affected? The foresters and the villagers had very different ideas of what a good forest should look like. The villagers wanted forest with a mixture of species to satisfy different needs: the fuel, the fodder, the leaves. The forest department on the other hand wanted the trees which were suitable for building. जैसे कि यहाँ दियोदर प्लांटेशन है इन कांगड़ा 1933 फ्रॉम इंडियन फॉरेस्ट रिकॉर्ड्स. फिर द इम्पीरियल फॉरेस्ट स्कूल देहरादून इंडिया, द फर्स्ट फॉरेस्ट्री स्कूल टू बी इनॉग्रेटेड इन द ब्रिटिश एम्पायर. फिर फिर हम लोगों ने क्या पढ़ा था कि द फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट ऑन द अदर हैंड वांटेड ट्रीज विच वर सूटेबल फॉर बिल्डिंग ships or railways. They needed the trees that could provide the hardwood and were tall and straight. So particular species like the teak and the sal were promoted and others were cut. In the forest areas, people use forest produce as roots, leaves, fruits, and the tubers for many things. The fruits and the tubers are so nutritious to eat, especially during the monsoons before the harvest has come in. Herbs are used for medicine, wood for agricultural implements like the yokes and the plows. The bamboo makes excellent fences and is also used to make the baskets and umbrella. A dried, scooped out gourd can be used as a portable water bottle, and almost everything is available in the forest. Leaves can be stitched together to make disposable plates and cups. The siadi, the bahunia wahili creeper can be used to make the ropes, and the thorny bark of the semur, the silk cotton tree, is used to grate the vegetables. Oil for cooking and to light lamps can be pressed from the fruit of the maua tree. The Forest Act meant severe hardship for the villages across the country. After the act, all the everyday practices cutting wood for their for their for their houses, grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing became illegal. People were now forced to steal the wood from the forest, and if they were caught, they were at the mercy of the forest guards who would take the bribes from them. The women who collected the fuel wood were especially worried. It was also common for the police constables and the forest guards to harass the people by demanding the free food from them. फिर collecting maua, the maduka indica from the forest. Villagers wake up before dawn and go to the forest to collect the maua flowers which have fallen on the forest floor. The maua trees are precious. Maua flowers can be eaten or used to make alcohol. The seeds can be used to make oil. Drying tendu leaves. The sale of the tendu leaves is a major source of income for many people living in the forest. Each bundle contains approximately 50 leaves, and if a person works very hard, they can perhaps collect as many as 100 bundles in a day. The women, children, and the old men are the main collectors. Okay. How did the forest rule affect the cultivation? One of the major impacts of the European colonization was on the practice of shifting cultivation of swidden agriculture. This is a traditional agriculture practice in many parts of Asia, Africa, and South America. It has many local names such as lading in Southeast Asia, milpa in Central America, chitimani or tevi in Africa, china in Sri Lanka. In India, the dhaya, penda, bevar, nivar, jhum, podu, khandad, and kumri are some of the local terms for the Sweden agriculture. In shifting cultivation, parts of the forest are plowed and burnt in rotation. The seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crops is harvested by October-November. Such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow for 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. A mixture of the crops is grown on these plots. In central India and Africa, it could be millets. In the Brazil, manioc, and in other parts of Latin America, maize and beans. European foresters regarded this practice as harmful for the forest. They felt that the land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow the trees for the railway timber. When a forest was burnt, there was the added danger of the flames spreading and burning valuable timber. Children living around the forest areas can often identify the hundreds of the species of the trees and the plants. How many species of the trees can you name? Bringing grain from the threshing grounds to the field. The men are carrying the grain in the baskets from the threshing fields. Men carry the baskets slung on a pole across the shoulders, while the women carry the baskets on their head. Tongua cultivation was a system in which the local farmers were allowed to cultivate temporarily within a plantation. In this photo taken in the Tharawadi division in Burma in 1921, the cultivators are sowing paddy. The man makes holes in the soil using the long bamboo poles with the iron tips. The women sow paddy in each hole. Fair shifting cultivation also made it harder for the government to calculate the taxes. Therefore, the government decided to ban the shifting cultivation. As a result, many communities were forcibly displaced from their homes in the forest. Some had to change the occupations, while some resisted through the large and small rebellions. Who could hunt? The new forest laws changed the lives of the forest dwellers in yet another way. Before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near the forest had survived by hunting deer, partridges, and a variety of small animals. This customary practice was prohibited by the forest laws. Those who were caught hunting were now punished for poaching. While the forest laws deprived the people of their customary rights to hunt, hunting of the big game became a sport. In India, the hunting of the tigers and other animals had been part of the culture of the court and the nobility for centuries. Many Mughal paintings show princes and emperors enjoying a hunt, but under the colonial rule, the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that the various species became almost extinct. The British saw large animals as a signs of a wild, primitive, and savage society. They believed that by killing dangerous animals, the British The British would civilize India. They gave rewards for the killing of tigers, wolves, and other large animals on the ground that they posed a threat to cultivators. Over 80,000 tigers, 1,50,000 leopards, 2 lakh wolves were killed for the reward in the period between 1875 and 1925. Gradually, the tiger came to be seen as a sporting trophy. The Maharaja of Sarguja alone shot 1,157 tigers and 2,000 leopards up to 1957. A British administrator, George Hewley, killed 400 tigers. Initially, certain areas of the forest were reserved for hunting. Only much later did the environmentalists and the conservators began to argue that all these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. फिर देखो क्या है The Little Fishermen. Children accompany their parents to the forest and learn how to fish, collect the forest produce and cultivate. The bamboo trap which the boy is holding in his right hand is kept at the mouth of a stream, the fish flow into it. Fair burning the forest, penda or the podu plot. In shifting cultivation, a clearing is made in the forest, especially on the slopes of the hill. After the trees have been cut, they are burned to provide ashes. The seeds are then scattered in the area and left to irrigated by the rain. The new trades, the new employment, and the new services. While the people lost out in many ways after the forest department took control of the forest, some people benefited from the new opportunities that had opened up in trade. Many communities left their traditional occupations and started trading in the forest products. And this happened not only in India but across the world. For example, Baigas are a forest community of central India. In 1892, after their shifting cultivation was stopped, they petitioned to the government. ठीक है और Lord Reading hunting in Nepal. Count the dead tigers in the photo. When the British colonial officials and Rajas went hunting, they were accompanied by whole retinue of servants. Especially the tracking was done by the skilled village hunters and the Sahib simplified the shot. ठीक है In 1892, after the shifting cultivation was stopped, Begaska, they petitioned to the government. We daily starve, having no food grain in our possession. The only wealth we possess is our axe. We have no clothes to cover our body with, but we pass cold nights by the fireside. We are now dying for want of food. We cannot go elsewhere. What fault have we done that the government does not take care of us? The prisoners are supplied with ample food in jail. A cultivator of the grass is not deprived of his holding. But this government does not give us a right who have lived here for generation past. Acha, Verer Elvin, cited in the Madhav Gadgil and Ramachandra Guha, The Fisher Land, An Ecological History of India. Uh, फिर एक और सोर्स है द रबर एक्सट्रैक्शन एंड द पुतुमायो. Everywhere in the world, the conditions of the work in plantation were horrific. The extraction of the rubber in the Putumayo region of the Amazon by the Peruvian Rubber Company, with a British and Peruvian interest, was dependent on the forced labor of the local Indians called the Huitotos. 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 From 1900 1912, the Putumayo output of 4,000 tons of rubber was associated with a decrease of some 30,000 among the Indian population due to torture, disease, and flight. A letter by an employee of a rubber company describes how the rubber was collected. The manager summoned hundreds of Indians to the station. He grasped his carbine and machete and began the slaughter of these defenseless Indians, leaving the ground covered with 150 corpses. Among them, men, women, children, bathed in blood and appealing for mercy. The survivors were heaped with the dead and burned to death, while the manager shouted, "I want to exterminate all the Indians who do not obey my orders about the rubber that I required them to bring in." With the growing demand for rubber in the mid-19th century, the Munduruku people of the Brazilian Amazon, who lived in villages on high ground and cultivated manioc, began to collect the latex from the wild rubber trees for supplying to traders. But gradually they descended to live in trading posts and become completely dependent on traders. In India, the trade in forest products was not new. From the medieval point onwards, we have record of Adivasi communities trading elephant and other goods like hide, corn, silk, cocoon, ivory, bamboo, spices, fiber, grasses, gums, and resins for the nomadic communities like the Banjaras. With the coming of the British, however, trade was completely regulated by the government. The British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest. The products of the particular areas, the grazing and hunting by the local people were restricted. In the process, many pastoral and nomadic communities like the Korwa, the Karacha, and the Yerukula of the Madras Presidency lost their livelihood. Some of them began to be called as the criminal tribes and were forced to work instead in the factory, mine, and plantation under the government supervision. New opportunities of the work did not always mean improved well-being of the people. In Assam, both the men and women from the forest communities like the Santhals and Orauns, Oraons from Jharkhand, and Gond from Chhattisgarh were recruited to work on the tea plantation. Their wages were low and conditions of the work were very bad. They could not even return easily to their home villages from where they had been recruited. ठीक है. फिर देखो क्या है, in many parts of the India and across the world, the forest communities rebelled against the changes that were being imposed on them. The leaders of this movement against the British, like the Sindhu and Kanu in the Santhal Pargans, the Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, or Eluri Sitarama, the Raju of Andhra Pradesh, are still remembered today in the songs and the stories. We will now discuss in detail one such rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Bastar in 1910. The people of Bastar. Bastar is located in the southernmost part of the Chhattisgarh and the border Andhra Pradesh, Odisha and Maharashtra. The central part of the Bastar is on a plateau. To the north of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain and to the south is the Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across the Bastar east to west. A number of different communities live in Bastar such as Maria and Moria Gond, Dhurvas, Bhatras, Bhatras, and the Halbas. They speak different languages but share common custom and belief. The people of the Bastar believe that each village was given to its land by the earth and in return they look after. ठीक है. फिर रेबिलियन होगा इन द फॉरेस्ट, आर्मी कैंप इन बस्तर 1910. This photograph of an army camp was taken in Bastar in 1910. The army moved with a tent, cooks, and soldiers. Here are sepoys guarding the camp against the rebels. The Bastar in 2000. In 1947, the Bastar kingdom was merged with the Kankar kingdom and became Bastar district in Madhya Pradesh. In 1998, it was divided again into three districts: the Kankar, Bastar, and the Dantewada. In 2001, these became the part of Chhattisgarh. In the 1910 rebellion, first started in the Kangar forest area encircled and soon spread to other parts of the state. फिर एक और सोर्स है ई दी हम लोग कहाँ पे थे कि ये बस्तर लोग जो थे उनको ये बिलीव था कि उनको मतलब अर्थ से मिला है एंड they look after the earth by making some offerings at each agriculture festival. In addition to the earth, they show respect to the spirits of the river, forest, and mountain. And since each village knows where its boundaries lie, the local people look after all the natural resources within that boundary. If the people from a village want to take some wood from the forest of another village, they pay a small fee called Devsari, Dand, D-A-N-D, or man in exchange. Some villages also protect their forest by engaging watchmen, and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headmen of the villages in the Pargana, the cluster of villages, meet and discuss the issues of concern including the forest. फिर आता है fears of the people. When the colonial government proposed to reserve 2/3 of the forest in 1905 and stopped shifting cultivation, hunting and collection of the forest produce, the people of the Bastar were very worried. Some villages were allowed to stay on in the reserved forest on the condition that they worked free for the forest department in cutting and transporting tree and protecting the forest from fire. Subsequently, these came to be known as the forest villages. The people of the other villages were displaced without any notice or compensation. For long, the villages had been suffering from the increased land rent and frequent demands for the free labor and the goods by the colonial officials. Then came the terrible famines in 1899 and 1900, and again in 1908, the reservations proved to be the last straw. People began to gather and discuss these issues in their village councils and bazaars and at festivals, or whatever the headmen and the priests of several villages were assembled. The initiative was taken by the Dhurvas of the Kangar forest, where reservation first took place. Although there was no single leader, many people speak of Gunda Dhur from village Nithanar as an important figure in the movement. In 1910, mango boughs, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows began circulating between villages. These were actually messages inviting villagers to rebel against the British. Every village contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Bazaars were looted, the houses of the officials and traders, the schools and the police stations were burnt and robbed, and the grain redistributed. Most of those who were attacked were in some way associated with the colonial state and its oppressive laws. William Ward, a missionary who observed the events, wrote, "From all the directions came streaming into Jagdalpur police, merchants, forest peons, schoolmasters and immigrants." ठीक है, देखो क्या लिखा है कि Bhondia collected 400 men, sacrificed a number of goat and started off to intercept the Diwan, who was expected to return from the direction of Bijapur. And this mob started on the 10th February, burned the Maringa school, the police post, the lines and the pound at the Keslur and the school at Tokapal Rajur, detached a contingent to burn the Karanji school and captured a head constable and 4 constables of the state reserve police who had been sent out to escort the Diwan and bring him in. The mob did not maltreat the guards seriously but eased them of their weapons and let them go. The one party of the rebels under the Bhondia Maji went off to the Koyer River, Koer River, to block the passage there in case the Diwan left the main road. The rest went on to the Dilmuli to stop the main road from the Bijapur. The Buddu Maji and the Harchand Nayak led the main body. फिर देखो एक और सोर्स है, elders living in the Bastar recounted the story of this battle they had heard from their parents. Podiyami Ganga of the Kankapal was told by his father Podiyami Topali that the British came and started taking the land. The Raja didn't pay attention to things happening around him, so seeing that land was being taken, his supporters gathered people. War started. His staunch supporters died and the rest were whipped. My father, Podi Ami Tokali, suffered many strokes but escaped and survived. It was a moment to get rid of British. The British used to tie them to horse and pull them. From every village to 2-3 people went to Jagdulpur, Gargi Deva and Michkola of Chitpal, Dole and Adra Bundi of Markamirars, the Vada Pandu of Belarus, Unga of Palem, Palem, and many others. Similarly, Chendu, an elder from the village Nadrasa, said, on the people's side were the big elders Mili Modal of Palem, the Soikal Durva of Nandrasa, and Pandava Maji. People from every Pargana camped in Alnar Tarai. The Paltan force surrounded the people in a flash. Gunda Dhur had flying powers and flew away, but what could those with bows and arrows do? The battle took place at night. The people hid in shrubs and crawled away. The army Paltan also ran away. All those who remained alive of the people somehow found their way home to their villages. The British sent the troops to suppress a rebellion. The Adivadi leaders tried to negotiate, but the British surrounded their camps and fired upon them. After that, they marched through the villages, flogging and punishing those who had taken part in the rebellion. Most villages were deserted as the people fled into the jungles. It took 3 months, February to May, for the British to regain the control. However, they never managed to capture Gunda Dhur. In a major victory for the rebels, work on reservation was temporarily suspended and the area to be reserved was reduced to roughly half of the plant that planted before 1910. The story of the forest and the people of the Bastar does not end there. After independence, the same practice of keeping people out of the forest and reserving them for the industrial use continued. In the 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of the natural sal forest should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. It was only after protest by the local environmentalists that the project was stopped. Let us now go to another part of Asia, Indonesia, and see what was happening there over the same period. Java is now famous as a rice producing island in Indonesia, but once upon a time it was covered mostly with the forest. The colonial power in Indonesia were the Dutch, and as we will see, there were many similarities in the laws for the forest control in Indonesia and India. Java in Indonesia is where the Dutch started forest management. Like the British, they wanted timber from Java to build the ships. In 1600, the population of Java was an estimated 3.4 million. There were many villages in the fertile plains, but there were also many communities living in the mountains and practicing shifting cultivation. The woodcutters of Java. The Kalangas of the Java were a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable that in 1755, when the Mataram kingdom of the Java split, the 6,000 Kalang families were equally divided between the two kingdoms. Without their expertise, it would have been difficult to harvest the teak and for the kings to build their palaces. When the Dutch began to gain control over the forest in the 18th century, they tried to make the Kalangas work under them. In 1770, the Kalangas resisted by attacking a Dutch fort at Joanna, but the uprising was suppressed. The Dutch scientific forestry. In the 19th century, when it became important to control territory and not just the people, the Dutch enacted forest laws in Java restricting the villagers' access to the forest. Now, the wood could only be cut for specified purpose like making the river boats or constructing houses, and only from the specific forest under close supervision. Villagers were punished for grazing cattle in the young stands, transporting the woods without a permit, or traveling on the forest roads with the horse carts or cattle. As in India, the need to manage the forest for shipbuilding and the railways to the uh, led to the introduction of a forest service. In 18 हाँ अब एक और चीज़ देखो कि फॉरेस्ट ट्रांसफॉर्मेशंस हुए इन जावा, ठीक है. द ट्रेन ट्रांसपोर्टिंग द टीक आउट ऑफ द फॉरेस्ट लेट कॉलोनियल पीरियड, ठीक है. अब in 1882, 280,000 sleepers were exported from the Java alone. However, all this required labor to cut the trees and transport the logs and prepared the sleepers. The Dutch first imposed the rents on the land being cultivated in the forest and then exempted some villages from these rents if they worked collectively to provide free labor in buffaloes for cutting and transporting timber. This was known as the uh, Blandong Dine Stand System. Blandong Dine Stand System. Later, instead of the rent exemption, the forest villagers were given the small wages, but their right to cultivate the forest land was restricted. The Samis Challenge, SAMIN. Around 1819, Suron Tiko Samin of Randu Blatung village, a teak forest village, began questioning the state ownership of the forest. He argued that the state had not created the wind, water, earth, wood, so it could not own it. Soon a widespread movement developed. Among those who helped organize it were the Sami's son-in-law. By 1907, 3,000 families were following his ideas. Some of the Samanists protested by laying down all their land when the Dutch came to survey it, while the others refused to pay taxes or fine or perform labor. The Dirk van Hogendorp, an official of the United East India Company in colonial Java, said, Batavians, be ashamed. Here with wonder what I have to communicate. Our fleets are destroyed, our trade languishes, our navigation is going to ruin. We purchase with immense treasures, timber and other materials for shipbuilding from the northern powers, and on Java we leave warlike and mercantile squadrons with their roots in the ground. Yes, the forest of Java have timber enough to build a respectable navy in a short time, besides as many merchant ships as we require. In spite of all the cutting, the forest of the Java grew as fast as they are cut and would be inexhaustible under good care and management. Most of the Indonesia forests are located in islands like the Sumatra, Kalimantan, and West Irian. However, Java is where the Dutch began their scientific forestry. The island, which is now famous for rice production, was once richly covered with teak. फिर आता है war and deforestation. The First World War and the Second World War had a major impact on the forest. In India, working plants were abandoned at this time, and the forest department cut the trees freely to meet the British war needs. In Java, just before the Japanese occupied the region, the Dutch followed a scorched earth policy, destroying the sawmills and burning huge piles of the giant teak logs so that they would not fall into the Japanese hands. The Japanese then exploited the forest recklessly for their own war industries, forcing the forest villagers to cut down the forest. Many villagers used this opportunity to expand cultivation in the forest. After the war, it was difficult for the Indonesian Forest Service to get this land back. As in India, people's need for the agricultural land has brought them into conflict with the forest department desire to control the land and exclude the people from it. The new developments in the forestry. Since the 1980s, government across Asia, Africa have begun to see that scientific forestry and the policy of keeping forest communities away from the forest has resulted in many conflict. The conservation of the forest rather than collecting timber has become a more important goal. The government has recognized that in order to meet this goal, the people who live near the forest must be involved. In many cases across India, from Mizoram to Kerala, dense forests have survived only because village protected them in sacred groves known as Sarnas, Deva, Devara Kudu, Kan, Kan, and Rai Rai. Some villagers have been patrolling their own forest, with each household taking it in turns instead of leaving it to the forest guard. Local forest communities and environmentalists today are thinking of different forms of the forest management. Uh, देखो यार एक है Indian Minutians Board War Timber Sleepers piled at Sule Pagoda ready for shipment 1917. The Allies would not have been as successful in the First World War and the Second World War if they had not been able to exploit the resource and the people of their colonies. Both the world wars had a devastating effect on the forest of India, Indonesia, and elsewhere. The Forest Department cut freely to satisfy the war needs. Log yard in Rembang under Dutch colonial rule. Now the last chapter of the book, that is chapter 5, Pastoralist in the Modern World, which is again of 20 pages. In this chapter, you will read about the nomadic pastoralist. Nomads are the people who do not live in one place but move from one area to another to earn their living. In many parts of the India, we see nomadic pastoralists on the move with their herds of goats and sheep or camels and cattle. Have you ever wondered where they're coming from and where they're headed? Do you know how they live and earn, what their past has been? Pastorals rarely enter the pages of history textbook. When you read about the economy, whether in your classes of history or economics, you learn about the agriculture and industry. Sometimes you read about the artisans, but rarely about the pastoral. As if their lives do not matter, as if they are the figures from the past who have no place in the modern society. In this chapter, you will see how the pastoralism has been important in the societies like India and Africa. You will read about the way colonialism impacted their lives and how they have coped with the pressure of the modern society. The chapter will first focus on India and then Africa, the pastoral in the modern world, sheep grazing on the bagyals of the eastern Gharwal. बगियाल क्या होते हैं? बगियाल are the vast natural pastures on the high mountains above 12,000 feet. They are under the snow in the winter and come to life after April. At this time, the entire mountainside is covered with a variety of grasses, roots, and herbs. By monsoons, these pastures are thick with vegetation and carpeted with the wildflowers in the mountains. Even today, the Gujjar backwards of the Jammu and Kashmir are the great herders of the goat and sheep. Many of them migrated to this region in the 19th century in the search of pastures for the animals. Gradually, over the decades, they established themselves in the area and moved annually between the summer and winter grazing grounds. In winter, when the high mountains were covered with the snow, they lived with their herds in the low hills of the Shivalik range, the dry scrub forest. Here provided pasture for their herds. By the end of the April, they began the northern march for the summer grazing grounds. Several households come together for this journey, forming what is known as a kafila. They crossed the Parpanjal passes, entered the valley of Kashmir. With the onset of the summer, the snow melted and the mountain sides were lush green. The variety of the grasses that sprouted provided rich, nutritious forage for the animal herds. By the end September, the Bakarwals were on the move again, this time on their downward journey back to the winter base. When the high mountains were covered with the snow, the herds were grazed in the low hills. In a different area of the mountains, the Gaddi shepherds of the Himachal Pradesh had a similar cycle of seasonal movement. They too spent the winter in the low hills of the Shivalik range, grazing their flock in the scrub forest. By April, they moved north and spent the summer in Lahul and Spiti. When the snow melted and the high passes were clear, many of them moved on to higher mountain. The pastoral nomads and their movements. Writing एक source है. Writing in the 1850s, G.C. Barnes gave the following description of the Gujars of the Kangra. In the hills, the Gujars are exclusively a pastoral tribe. They cultivate scarcely at all, but these keep the flocks of the sheep and the goats, and the Gujars' wealth consists of buffalo. These people live in the skirts of the forest and maintain their existence exclusively by the sale of the milk, ghee, and other produce of their herds. The men graze the cattle and frequently lie out for the weeks in the wood, tending their herds. The women repair to the markets every morning with the baskets on their head, with the little earthen pots filled with the milk, buttermilk, and ghee. Each of these pots containing the proportion required for a daily meal. During the hot weather, the Gujars especially drive their herds to the upper range where the buffaloes rejoice in the rich grass which the rain bring forth, and at the same time attain the condition from the temperature, climate, and the immunity from the venomous flies that torment their existence in the plains. A Gujjar mandap on the high mountain in the central Garhwal. The Gujjar cattle herders live in these mandaps made of ringal, hill, bamboo, and grass from the bugyal. A mandap was also a workplace. Here, the Gujjar used to make ghee, which they took down for sale. In recent years, they have begun to transport the milk directly in the buses and the trucks. These mandaps are at about 10,000 to 11,000 feet. Buffaloes cannot climb any higher. अच्छा देखो, हम लोग क्या पढ़ रहे थे कि by September they began the return movement. On the way, they stopped once again in the villages of 99999. हाँ मैम, rest we will continue in the next video.